because you have to anticipate that in order to get enough traffic to sustain your line. So that was question number one. And then question number two was, what happens when you discover that you don't have all that territory to yourself? That in fact, another rival line has come in to compete with you for it. And that is the story that I'll be telling today. And it leads obviously here to Santa Fe. So William Barstow Strong. Everybody in this story has three names. I love that. And they have remarkable whiskers. His, I would argue, the most remarkable of all. That's what I think of as an Old Testament beard. It goes, a good ways down his chest, and conveys something of the certainty, I believe, of his personality. This is somebody who doesn't care what other people think, that he's going to wear his beard as he likes. And the thing about Strong, there were two things about Strong. One is that he grew up in Vermont. He was born in Vermont, but grew up in Beloit, Wisconsin, and turned quickly to railroading as a teenager with a small line in Wisconsin, and then got picked up by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, and in his, I would say, late 30s, and then came to the Santa Fe Railroad, the railroad of my story, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, in his early 40s, at first as the general manager and ultimately as the president. Having said that, that is about all that is known of his personal life, beyond the fact that he had a wife and three kids. It's amazing that this is one of the great heroes of railroading in the 19th century. And in the archives of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad in Topeka, which fills about half of this room, that the personal details about Strong would fill just a shoebox. There is nothing that is recorded by this man. And one of the miseries and tragedies of history is that because nothing was recorded about him, he has not gotten his due. And if you want a guide to how you're going to be preserved, any of you in history, start writing stuff down now, because you want to collect as much information in written form as you can, so that historians later will be able to say that much more about you. If you don't, you will be forgotten. And that would have happened to him, but for me. But the other thing that you know about Strong is that he lived by one maxim, and he was, by the way, he was as the head of the Santa Fe during this period that I'm writing about, that he was a corporate manager. Most of the train men of the age, people like Jay Gould, were owners. They were not managers, and he was a manager, not an owner. He was not a rich man. He lived on his salary. But nonetheless, he was a company man who had a very clear vision about what to do, and he acted on it in every instance. And he lived by this single maxim, which is grow or die. The answer to every question in railroading was build more track. And this is what he did, ultimately creating the largest railroad in the world for a certain period, 8,000 miles long. But it certainly didn't start out that way. And then we have, as his alter ego, General William Jackson Palmer. Note the mustache. That in that era, to be mostly clean shaven like that was a mark of some distinction. And notice also how well coiffed he is, and also how well dressed he is, and I would say how handsome he is. That he was said to be the best dressed man in all of Colorado, but given how few people there were in Colorado, that may not be as bold a statement as you would think. He was quite a contrast to Strong. He was, and I'll show you just why. This is him in his childhood. He was the child of a couple of Quakers in Philadelphia, and that in his youth, and in fact throughout his life, he was riven by his Quaker faith. Because as a Quaker, he was meant to be a pacifist, but as a Quaker, he was also supposed to believe fervently in the abolitionist cause. So that when the Civil War came along, that he was in absolute agony about what part of his faith to go along with. And his parents were very stern in insisting that he not fight. But he decided to fight after a long period of self-examination. And he not only, and then he threw himself into the cavalry, which was the most sort of heroic of the different bits of soldiering. And he did something extraordinarily daring, which was after the Battle of Antietam, that General McClellan, wanted to try and figure out which way Lee's army was going. So Palmer said, well, I'll go spy behind enemy lines and I'll go find out. Incredibly, you get hung for this. So he does this. He goes behind enemy lines, and if he's betrayed by a friend of his who stupidly pointed out pretty much where he was, and he was brought before General Lee, and Lee said, without any question, hang him. Sent to Richmond, where there was a prison where they hung people. But he arrived and, for a journey of like 8 hours on horseback. And can you imagine 8 hours on horseback going to your certain death? But as it turned out, that once he got there, the sergeant, it was about midnight, he was too tired to read the paperwork. And so Lee's orders were ignored. And he was instead clapped in that Richmond prison. And he busied himself trying to literally saw his way out of the prison with a penknife, a serrated penknife. And after 2 months, he was able to open up enough of a hole so that he could look down and see where he was. And unfortunately, what he discovered was that he was on the bottom floor and there were sentries all around the perimeter. And so he was confined there for months more until he was able to get an exchange and freed. He went back into the war and was served as a brigadier. He won the rank of brigadier general after a otherwise disastrous battle of Chattanooga. But he distinguished himself, became a brigadier general, and then returned to his first love, which was railroading. And to it, he brought a kind of warrior spirit, but he also had this deep-seated sort of Quaker faith, believing in community, family, and closeness, that sort of marked a contrast within him, and also marked a contrast with Strong. So in the 1870s, at the time of this book, there were 4 transcontinentals, as you can see, and that I'll try and use this. Look at this. Okay, and then you'll see that most of them are going across the West. If you can make out the words there, and you have spectacular eyesight. But let me just say that basically there are 4 principal east-west lines going from north to south, and from the northern Pacific down to the southern Pacific. And in the middle are 2 lines, of which one we're particularly concerned, the one that I'm pointing at here, which is the